right? Thanking and praising God for, among other things, the way that he gives us a picture of the future in this portion of Luke's description of the life of Christ that mirrors things we have seen in the other synoptic gospels when Jesus turns to give them an idea of what the future will look like, understanding the outlook for Jerusalem and the entire nation of Israel, understanding that AD 70, the destruction of Jerusalem is on the horizon, and it is linked in a lot of ways to the end of all things in general. But before that, the chapter is going to start not necessarily taking the baton from chapter 16, where he was talking about some of the ways in which mismanaging God's resources can lead to a not so bright future. He is going to, in addition to talking about the way that mismanaging God's blessings can get us some unhappy consequences, he's going to go on to talk about some other things that can also cause us to stray from the path that God has for us, which is really a path that, as we saw early on in Luke's description of the life of Christ, it's a path that really is designed for us to have peace. Understanding that, before he gets to the peace he's going to talk about in the first couple of verses, the way that being the kind of person that, in my paraphrase, is the source of drama, or as Jesus is literally going to say it, is the cause of other people being tempted to do wrong. That's a great way to end up on God's bad side, as he is also going to warn them, as we've seen before, and going back to Matthew's description of the model prayer, he's going to say, being unforgiving is another way to keep ourselves in a place where God will not be willing to forgive us. In this particular circumstance, being one who is inclined to hold a grudge even when people have genuinely apologized is another great way. It's our great way to get on God's bad side. As the chapter is going to pause in verses 5 and 6 to have the apostles essentially ask God to help them to understand how to increase their faith, at which point he's going to seem to say it is not the amount of faith that matters, but the quality of your faith, because he is going to tell them in the famous statement, if you simply had faith as much as a grain of mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted in the sea, and it would obey you, similar to things that he has said about their ability to uproot mountains or to move mountains. It's not a whole lot of faith that's necessary. It's the quality of the faith, understanding that as far as the amount, it doesn't take much more than a mustard seed sized faith to do great things. As he's then going to go on in verses 7 through 10 to use a story or an illustration that I don't think appears in any of the other gospels, that being the illustration of being unworthy servants, or having the attitude of being unworthy servants. Understanding that in Israel, at least historically, going back to the law, it was more likely that someone had become a servant because of a debt that they had incurred than they would have become a servant by birth. Understanding that there was also the possibility that nations that got a little bit too enthusiastic about expanding their territory could also be taken as prisoners of war, as an act of mercy to the alternative, which was being killed for going into nations you had no business being in. And so understand, those were the two ways that you typically became a servant in Israel. And so you became indebted either by your misbehavior or by a financial misstep. And so understanding that, it could be easy to lose track of in modern Israel, I guess, or modern Israel at this time, that likewise, your relationship with God had to do with some sort of debt that you could not pay. And because he was not there physically reminding you of your servitude, it could be easy to begin to look at your service as some credit to you, as opposed to simply a condition of God bailing us out of a situation that we couldn't afford to get out of. And so this story seems to be another perspective on that whole concept of humility, understanding that he says, in due time, no matter what your debt is, if you humble yourself under all of the things that he is calling you to do, he will exalt you, because it was never his intent to leave you in a lowly circumstance. He bailed you out for a better purpose. But understand that there is a reason behind the things that he is telling you to do, and they are not a credit to you. They are simply a gratitude or a thanks for all the things that he has done for you and the things that he has ahead for you, if we humble down under the responsibilities or duties that he has given us. As the next set of verses, going from verses 11 through 19, are going to talk about 10 lepers that he cleanses. And in line with that whole concept of humility, he credits one who actually has the humility or the gratitude to come back and say thanks, saying we're not 10 lepers healed. Why is the only one who came back to show gratitude or give thanks a Samaritan? He's going to call him a foreigner. Once again, lamenting the way in which those outside of Israel are still showing, in some ways, higher character or integrity than those who might have become too comfortable being God's people. Similarly, he is going to go on in verses 20 and 21 to field a question from the Pharisees again. This time them asking him, when will the kingdom come? With his famous answer in verse 21, or verses 20 and 21, being the kingdom of God is not coming with signs to be observed, nor will they say, look, here it is, or there, for behold, the kingdom of God is in the midst of you. And we'll come back to that point, because what he's going to eventually say in verses 22 going forward is going to seem to potentially contradict it, because he's going to go on to talk about clear signs that are going to accompany his second coming, or his return to earth, understanding that likewise he is weaving in the prophecy about his crucifixion or his death and resurrection, and sprinkled in that, much like we've seen in Matthew and Mark, he's going to seem to talk about more low-key in this description. Understand that he's going to talk about end times again in Luke, but he's going to seem to likewise weave into this prophecy about the end times some low-key warnings about what it's going to be like in the AD 70 destruction of Jerusalem as well. But either way, the point that might have most caught my attention is his description of the kingdom being already among them, not coming with signs to be observed in verses 20 through 21. And I'm not sure if this helps to reconcile it. But first of all, it may help to consider that he is possibly describing not so much a moment as much as he is describing a process. The process beginning now. He, as the Christ, has come essentially reigning in Israel. And it's become clear. Why? Because he is doing things that not even their best or most renowned teachers and holy men are able to do. He's doing miraculous healings, all kinds of signs. And once he finally is crucified, this is going to continue on through his apostles. And so to the degree that they're living in a time where they're seeing unprecedented things, to a certain degree, the beginning of the kingdom has already physically come to them in the form of the Christ. But a lot of them are missing it, understanding that much of what he's telling his own apostles about the kingdom is still kind of going over their head. However, there is a fullness to God's kingdom that is going to be represented by his second coming, where, for lack of a better term, there's no more foolishness. There's no more debating. There's no more begging and pleading. He's simply coming back in power, illustrated by the fact that he is described in two forms, meaning he came as the lamb, but he's going to return as the lion. And so just because he came as the lamb doesn't mean that he was any less royal than he was when we could appreciate his power as the lion. Reminding me that one of the reasons why they may be missing it goes back to the fact that even though they are looking for the kingdom to return in all of the splendor of the days of David and King Solomon, when they were basically under Solomon, as we mentioned before, the greatest kingdom on earth, they didn't realize what that looked like for even the least of those who served under David and Solomon. Understanding that when the Queen of Sheba came to visit Solomon, one of the things that she noticed was, even though he was married to a whole bunch of women, it seemed like all of his wives and even his servants were happy. And so she was shocked at not only the wealth, but the harmony that they seemed to exist, or that they seemed to enjoy in the days of Solomon. And so Christ, coming to a very different Israel, he's not coming to a kingdom where things went from good under David to better under Solomon. He is having to correct the condition to which Israel has sunk in his day. And so it's much like when you see one of the ministries that we had a chance to work with, or that a number of churches of Christ work with, and it's Church of Christ Disaster Relief. When they go into areas that have been affected either by floods or fires or various disasters, they don't run to the people whose neighborhoods haven't been affected to make sure that they're okay. They run past those neighborhoods to the most affected portions of town. And even though they couldn't outwardly see it in Israel, and even though they probably could outwardly see it, they probably become so accustomed to the pathetic nature that so much of Israel has declined into, that it's just normal for them to see the people suffering. And for Jesus, however, it's more of an emergency. And so they're wondering why he's spending so much time around those people, when those are, as he will say, the exact people that he came to help. Understanding that in restoring the kingdom to its greatness, he's not starting with those who need help the least. He's starting with those who need help the most. And he seems to be trying to rebuild the society from the bottom up, which is why they don't recognize him. Because while they seem to have carved out a quite comfortable life in the midst of the disaster that Israel had become, he's running to the disaster to actually repair it. And that seems to be the way in which he's establishing his kingdom. Low key, at work, in the midst of them, repairing the kingdom's most damaged areas, while many of them are still hoping for another king.